Our next speaker is Jeff Malkin from Encoding.com. And with the explosion of streaming services, there's never been a greater need for the fast output of premium video content for broadcast and OTT distribution. And the cloud is now the go-to option for making this happen. New innovations in cloud-based media processing allow you to rapidly transcode, package, and securely distribute B2B content to a global audience with the confidence that it will pass the most stringent conformance checks and be free of errors and play out on all linear systems and OTT platforms. So setting the stage that way, Jeff, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Eric. Good morning.
Good morning. So what has changed in the last few years that now makes cloud processing such an attractive option for broadcast and OTT?
Yeah, good question. Well, over the last, call it 10 years, D2C, direct-to-consumer workflows for streaming have already been, migrated to or migrating to the cloud. I like to say Encoding.com has been an overnight success. It's just only taken 13 years. And so broadcasters and streaming media companies already have experienced the value that's inherent to operating workflows in the cloud. But one key thing that's been holding back these companies from deploying their broadcast or more complex B2B workflows in the cloud has been, a general lack of support by cloud vendors for critical features that are specific to these workflows. And now that there are tools and engines that support these critical features in the cloud, it's really about convergence of the direct-to-consumer and the B2B workflows through the same processing systems, right? And in addition to that, some things in the last few years with the storage, with the cloud wars, storage, the cost of storage in the cloud is getting cheaper and the prices are coming down. So you're starting to see more and more companies store their assets in the cloud, along with improved security and security enhancements around storing in the cloud. And even more recently, an increased amount of playout and origin happening in the cloud. So in other words, you can now efficiently store your source content in the cloud, transcode it, package it, and distribute it, all orchestrated in the cloud. And so all these things have made it now attractive to support B2B and broadcast workflows in the cloud.
Right. And, it was always interesting walking around NAB or IBC, if we can remember those days when we could walk around Amsterdam and Las Vegas,
Yeah.
Coming from the streaming and OTT industry and then entering a world full of broadcast companies, being reminded that broadcast especially has taken a while to really get on board with the cloud. But as you said, that seems to have finally happened. It just took 10 or 13 years. So what are some of the must-have capabilities that a cloud-based broadcast encoding workflow should have?
Yeah. Well, let's start with, on the format side, obviously you need to be able to produce cable labs compliant transport streams. That's an absolute critical component. Having presets that support a vast majority of these requirements for playback, on all devices, but also having granular control over transport stream parameters like PIDs or PCR deltas or PAT frequency, et cetera. And then also, in addition to cable labs formats, but also increasing number are using ProRes and MXF. So supporting those formats is absolutely critical. Support for assembly and conformance requirements. This is something that's unique, I think, to B2B and broadcast workflows versus direct-to-consumer workflows. So meaning, aligning the containers and codecs of the source material with the production workflow requirements. Things like frame rates, frame resolutions, bit rates, colorimetry, et cetera. And from an assembly perspective, trimming tops and tails, it's inserting, replacing, and moving ads, detecting black frames, and and these kinds of things. So those are critical components. Supporting Nielsen, right? So the ability for customers to to work within their C3 and C7 workflow requirements. Not only the ability to insert Nielsen audio watermarks, those initial watermarks, but also to register the SID ticks with the Nielsen key management servers. I would say working with complex audio is unique to these workflows as well, right? So assets are arriving from multiple sources off cameras or edit bays or satellite feeds, and there's a lot of lack of consistency across, a number of audio channels and
Right.
tracks and so forth and so on, right? So there's conformance issues around working with audio, and so you'll need to first identify the audio data, and then be able to perform lossless kind of manipulations with these audio tracks and layouts, right? And then of course working with languages becomes
Hmm.
increasingly complex as well. And I would say finally the other critical thing, features that are required supporting these workflows is around captions, right? That's where we have found a lot of headaches, over the last couple of years. But specifically working with a wide variety of caption formats, automation of the caption extraction and modification, and then reinsertion back into mezzanine and broadcast formats.
Okay. Wow. So basically a lot more acronyms is what you're saying.
Yes, yeah, we can have 20-minute conversations and without actually saying a full word. I'm convinced
Right.
that.
Exactly. So pulling back from the specifics of encoding and transcoding for broadcast, what differentiates the cloud encoding platforms that are currently on the market? What should prospective customers be on the lookout for?
Yeah. Okay. I'll try to be objective here.
Right.
But look, there are many components that make up a video workflow, right? Everything from storage and CMS, transcoding and packaging, DRM, players, analytics, subscriber management, all that stuff. And it's very difficult to be great at any one of those components, let alone all of them. So I think when looking at options for choosing a cloud encoding vendor, one who focuses solely on or has deep expertise in encoding is, it seems obvious, but that's critical. Right? There's just so many varieties of ingest and distribution formats across video, audio, captions, DRM, etc. So it's that deep expertise, I would say, is one thing to look for. Another is nimbleness, right? What I mean by that is, having a feature-rich platform for encoding and packaging. Well, that you have to have that to be in the game in the first place. But what we find is that there are going to be some custom features that have to get developed to tie into third-party or legacy, systems, or into the ecosystem, or dealing with outlier cases, etc. So having the ability to quickly develop and deploy these new custom features, I think, is something that customers should look for. I would say, extension of that, we all know that leveraging the cloud for dynamic scale and automation, has great value, but it's also important to choose a cloud encoding vendor that brings what's called the human services to the table, right? And 24/7 emergency support, compression and workflow expertise, deep expertise there, and assistance. Basically, be an extension to the customer's video engineering teams, because unlike Netflix, most companies don't have 200 video engineers on staff.
Right.
Yeah. So those are the things that I would look for.
Sure. So, in the time we have left, could you give us an example? Like, let's say one of your major B2B clients and how you helped them solve some of their workflow challenges.
Yeah, sure. Well, we had one recently. I won't mention the name, but a major media company approached us right before the Christmas holiday, and they needed to stand up a brand new broadcast and SVOD workflow very quickly, within 6 to 8 weeks. So we're just getting to the finish line now. And so the speed of that was already unusual, right? It's usually more, you usually have months. And so in this particular workflow or use case, the customer had workflow and had conformance and assembly requirements in their workflow. Basically, they wanted to be able to automate sending us an EDL and an edit decision list that has the automating of black frame detection and removal, among other things, and some assembly. Implement a ProRes workflow, including there was a Nielsen workflow where being able to register those SID ticks with their own Nielsen workflow server, key management server. And also we had to build some custom features, as I mentioned earlier. That's not uncommon, right? So we had to build some support for some unique audio tagging requirements, along with extracting captions from a Final Cut Pro mux type, which is very unusual. Devil's always in the details, Eric. Devil's always in the details. So
right.
again, it was not only having the platform that covered, call it 97% of their features, but we had to also, build these other 3% very quickly. And I would say this is typical. It's a typical, scenario. So that just happened.
Right. So there's never one size fits all, right? I mean, there's always
There
custom
isn't.
requirements.
Yeah, there is. And it helps that, over time we're continuing to add more and more features. So the breadth of features, I mean, like in our case, we have, I think, 45 different engines running underneath our API today. Wow. Next year when we do this, it'll be 50. And that's because customers keep bringing us unique and differing and changing requirements, right? So that goes back to the nimbleness and the ability to quickly add new features, et cetera.
Sure. We have one question from the audience, and I'm going to ask the person who posed the question to stand by their keyboard in case we need some clarification here. But is there a possibility of a multi-encoder mindset in the future, purely based on cost, complexity, and quality requirements?
Well, I'm not sure if that person is asking for multiple cloud vendors or multiple different engines underneath a specific vendor.
Right. In other words, are they talking about a multi-CDN sort of approach?
Yeah,
right?
and then I can answer both.
And they did specify multiple cloud vendors.
Right. Yes, that's not an uncommon approach where large media companies or telcos, even more so, where they have these global transcode platforms where they've actually implemented APIs from several different cloud encoding vendors. Now, I think there's this sort of dream where almost like federated CDN, where you could make decisions in real time based on cost and features, but I don't think that's in the reality, that's not what happens, because a lot of these deals that vendors do with their customers are based on volume commitments and so forth and so on, right? So it's hard to do it based on price. What you can do, though, is some vendors might be better at working with this particular type of workflow or use case. Others might be better at this. This vendor might be much better at working with HDR content. This vendor might be better handling large volumes of MP4 content. So in that regard, I think it's more based around having multiple vendors where you're choosing based on use case rather than cost.
Sure. Makes sense. All right. We have one other question as well. Is it common to do just-in-time transcoding adjusted based on your final user, device, bandwidth, et cetera?
No, we haven't seen too many of those workflows, to be honest. So there's just-in-time packaging. That pendulum also swings, both ways. As storage becomes cheaper, I think it's easier to transcode and package and store in multiple versions. So from a just-in-time transcoding perspective, is not something that we've seen too much request for.